to go on it. Most of you know, some of you didn't. And basically, we just went around the building and looked at everything and talked about the places in the building that are least secure, most secure, ways to make them more secure, how to deal with those kind of things. And then we'll have a question and answer period about anything you want. All right. And we're going to record this, just so you're aware, just for in-house use for our own church. So anybody that didn't get to come to this, that wanted to come to this, it'll be available.
First of all, I want to thank both just the congregation in general and your leadership team. It's neat for me to get to travel the country and to interact with different leadership teams and get to know people and meet people. And I'm an extrovert, so that's an added bonus for me. But I've just, Andrew has talked up just the other staff and the elders at this church since you've been here. You've talked them up and continue to talk them up. I've gotten to interact with you guys, and I will talk you guys up everywhere that I go. You guys have an awareness that, and an interest in raised awareness that is just so important. It's so important. And leadership is tough. For any of you guys in leadership, you know, you deal with everything from the petty things that come up to the deaths, you know, the funerals and the weddings, and so your emotions are just up and down and up and down, and at the end of the day, sometimes you just have to process the stuff that we hear just within our own congregation. But then you're trying to plan and you're trying to lead and you're trying to cast vision. Then you have concern for people, and then you see people leave the church. Our church witnessed in Exodus over the last 2 years, and we're a small church to begin with, but we lost more than 50% of our church. So we are right now a 50-member church that's just struggling through all kinds of things and identity things, trying to refigure out who we are. And leadership is just really, really tough. And so I think a lot of times we get so caught up in the churchy things that we forget that there are real genuine threats and really deep, deep wounds. And just in the past 24 hours, I've had multiple people come up to me and just cry. This morning, there were several people that had been watching this online yesterday, and that was a last-minute thing. That was just yesterday morning. We were like, oh, we should probably stream that online. And so several people came up to me today and hugged me and said thank you. Some of those, I presume, are survivors who have a story to tell. And I had somebody yesterday that said I'd never told anybody, and I've carried this with me my whole life. This is more than just making our buildings safe places. You know, it's a level of just ministry and connecting to people on a deep, deep spiritual level who have experienced horrible, horrible things. But the flip side of that is preventing and having an awareness, preventing this kind of abuse from taking place, or any kind of abuse from taking place. And so kind of just to recap and give you guys the big picture, which I think you guys get, but I'm going to recap just some things that I've seen here. One is that you guys are making this place really safe. We're going to talk mostly about that this afternoon, making your facility a safe place. Another component is raising awareness in your children. Children who are being abused, if you listened again to the Larry Nassar victim impact statements, Children don't know that they're being abused because they don't have a context for understanding that what they're happening to them is called abuse. They know it doesn't feel right, but they don't have a context to understand that they're being abused. We're raising that awareness in this congregation. You guys are looking at Lauren's kids, the Safer, Smarter Kids curriculum, where kids have a heightened awareness, and they will know. They will be well trained in this congregation. If they're being abused or if they have been abused, that awareness is going to be raised in the kids, but it doesn't stop there. They're going to have a process, and they're going to know who their trusted triangle of adults are to tell. Be prepared for that. There will be things that get uncovered in this church. I can promise you that. Not necessarily abuse that's happened in the church, but there are going to be kids who come and say, Grandpa did those things to me. Be prepared for that. Be ready to catch those kids, and as a leadership team, be ready to come together and say, okay, how do we prepare for those kinds of statements to come from kids? And how do we catch them? And how do we, how and when do we report as mandated reporters? But how do we help catch those kids so that that cycle is broken? And so that they're not in their 70s saying, geez, I wish somebody would have done something about it. Be prepared beforehand so you're not scrambling to try to figure this out as this stuff is being brought up and brought to the surface. So that's another component, raising awareness in the kids. There's another component that we don't think about very often, and that's raising awareness to bring out into the homes. And what I mean by that is we can make this the safest property on the planet, and those kids go home and they're being abused in their home, or in their schools, or at a friend's house. My saying, I kind of adopted this, but I say we can build the Titanic and still strike an iceberg. We can make this the safest building in the world, and those kids get off property, and they're being abused, and I'm not okay with that. And so it's a multifaceted community networking of raising awareness within the kids, within the parents, within the leadership, within the congregation as a whole, and saying, we've got to shift this culture. I love that Rachel Riviera spoke yesterday, and that's the first time ever that I've had anybody speak at one of my events. But I was just listening to her, and I was like, she really knows, she knows what she's talking about, and she needs to stand before this group, and you guys need to see that she's a community resource that's just fantastic. And it's that networking, and I think she appreciated that, and I appreciated that she was willing to do it. Networking it's a community thing that goes into our law enforcement. It goes into our medical staff. We didn't even touch hospitals. They're not well trained. I have a sister who's a nurse and a brother who's a medical doctor at Vanderbilt. They're not being trained, and they have all kinds of cases that come in. And they don't have a clue what to do with them. So, reaching out into your medical community within the town and saying, how do we help you guys, and how do you guys help us? There's always a two-way street. I don't claim to have all the answers. I am always learning from. I learned a ton by being here this weekend. A ton. You guys made me think of things that I never would have thought of. And so I'm going to use that, and that's what strengthens my trainings whenever I go out and teach people. It is a community process. Community networking. So I want you guys to keep that in mind, not just in the back of your mind. That needs to be in the forefront of your mind. That as you think through these things, as you build a policy, well, you have a policy, but as you expand on that policy, as you tighten up security in the building, still be thinking community-wide, and really, eventually, that community becomes a global movement. And that's never been done in the field of abuse before. We have these little pockets of people across the country that they train. Some trainings are good, most trainings are not. But it's like these little pockets of things, and people aren't even connected in their own communities, and there's no way that that's going to spread. I mean, it's a lot like the kingdom. You know, if we're the church in town that we're closed off to ourselves and we don't talk to any other church or network with any other church, we become this little community unto ourselves, and that never has this big global outreach. And so I predict, I honestly believe this, not because I want to believe it, but because I see evidence of it. I think that there is a tidal wave coming in this nation that's going to begin to shift, where survivors are being empowered to come forward, and they're going to start standing up, and they're going to be doing exactly what I'm doing right now. We're already seeing evidence of this. I never would have predicted that the Harvey Weinstein stuff that happened would have made so many survivors stand up, and once they see other survivors stand up, you know, the whole Me Too movement was massive, is massive. And so we should be encouraged by that, instead of saying, oh my goodness, you know, there's just so much abuse out there. There is, but there are so many people out there who have been abused, and they're motivated, and they're ready to fight. And so we shouldn't just say, well, you know, we want to give them a voice and just let them talk and heal. That's part of it, but the bigger part of that is we need to be asking them to help us see what we need to see, and to say, we want you, the survivors, to take the lead. We're not going to be the ones taking the lead saying, do you want to tag along? We need to be saying to the survivors, will you be out front and show me, you lead me, and you forge a path, and I'm going to be right there behind you or beside you, and we're going to fight this battle together. I see it coming. I'm seeing evidence of it. So, I'm encouraged, and I'm just super encouraged for being here this weekend. I can't thank you guys enough. As I talk about the walkthroughs that we did this morning, I want to pull up an article here, if I can find it. It's on here somewhere. Here we go. I'm going to read this article. You guys might recognize somebody's name in this article. This was a mega church in Kansas. This was written back in 2016, so about a year and a half ago. An attorney representing West Side Family Church, the, I guess you pronounce it, Lenexa, the Lenexa Church, that Prairie Village native Kessler Lichtenegger attended with his family for years before his abuse of 2 young members led to his dismissal from the congregation and ultimately his imprisonment, vigorously defended the organization against claims contained in a court filing by the girl's family. Attorney Brad Russell said the filing was replete with factual inaccuracies, and that contrary to the assertions made in the suit, church officials were not aware that Lichtenegger had been convicted of sex crimes against minors prior to the criminal incident that occurred on church property in the summer of 2014. Russell acknowledged that Lichtenegger's father had told pastors a few years earlier that there was something going on with Lichtenegger and his older brother, but at no point did anyone alert them specifically to sexual misconduct. This is a church. This is where lots of people bring their problems and their sins. It's a daily occurrence for someone to say, I'm having problems, he said. It's a balancing act that pastors have to do to decide how far to pry and push somebody. That was a statement by the church's attorney. Russell said the church's decision to suggest Lichtenegger's father accompanied the teen when he attended was the result of concerns about a number of stresses in his life, including a divorce going on in the family. Russell also said that the petition's insinuation that Lichtenegger was instructing and supervising children was utterly ridiculous and preposterous, pointing out that at one point in the petition, the plaintiff's lawyers even suggested Lichtenegger was a member of the clergy. Instead, Russell said, Lichtenegger's participation in the Vacation Bible School program was limited to performing with other older children, youth members, in its skits to open and close the day's activities. It was between his participation in those skits, Russell said, that Lichtenegger went out to the van in the church lot and invited his victim to join him. Russell also made clear that the church had a background check policy in place for volunteers, but that because Lichtenegger's prior conviction was sealed by the juvenile court, it was hidden to background checking companies. He said that as far as the church knew, Kessler had no history of sexual misconduct. What the church knew was that he was attending public school where he would have daily access to a variety of girls, Russell said. If he was a known sexual predator, you would feel the school would take steps to address that there. Jumping down a little bit, Russell argued that the church ultimately became the scene of a crime that was unfortunately predictable and that could have happened almost anywhere. The church parking lot became a target of opportunity for Kessler or Lichtenegger, Russell said. This could have happened at the kids' schools. It could have happened at the parents' homes after school. We know Kessler now, and we know that what his propensities are. And knowing that, we know that this was probably going to happen somewhere at some time. But some advocates for the victims have been calling into question the church's claims in the wake of court filing. David Clohessy, director of Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, held a press conference Wednesday to say that Snap's understanding was that the church did know of Lichtenegger's previous charges. Lichtenegger should not have been at Vacation Bible School, Clohessy contended. Rebecca Randalls, the attorney who filed the civil suit on behalf of the victims, said the information the church provided to police during the criminal process indicated that they knew Lichtenegger had a history of sexual misconduct. The fact that the church put protocols in place, Randalls said, shows the church was aware. Randalls wondered how the church could have put someone in that history in a position to attend Vacation Bible School, which that's where this incident took place. She said that the suit does not intend to claim Lichtenegger was a managing agent for the church, but that he was put out as a leader. The mother of the two girls, who listed as Jane Doe 33 in the filing, also issued a statement this morning. We are saddened by the need to file this lawsuit on behalf of our daughters and all children at Westside Family Church. We feel that the church leaders did not take the steps necessary to protect our children from this publicly known convicted sex offender. We feel that they willingly enabled him to participate in student ministry. We're hoping this lawsuit will bring awareness to the need for better sexual predator policies to be put into place and firmly administered at Westside, as well as other organizations and venues where parents have a right to expect their children are safe. Jimmy Hinton, don't know who that guy is, a Pennsylvania minister who started the organization Church Protect last year to help congregations identify potential predators and who had been in contact with the families of Lichtenegger's victims, said Westside's response to the suit and the criticisms of the plaintiffs are predictable. Hinton reported his own father, also a minister, to investigators after hearing from a woman who had been in his congregation that he had sexually abused her as a child. He now leads the church from where his father was removed and works to help other churches identify pedophiles. This is quoting me. I told the family to expect harsh pushback, Hinton said of the lawsuit. Nobody ever wants to admit they made a bad decision. Unfortunately, letting people who have sex crimes on their records interact with minors is done routinely. Very rarely do churches separate a perpetrator from children because they want to believe that the person is reformed. This was before I even did that whole presentation on what to believe. I'd seen these patterns, and I went back and I read that, and I was like, even back then, I was picking up on this. We want to believe the best in people. This church, well, I'll go on. I'll read this next paragraph, and then I'll tell you a little bit about this case. Hinton said that churches are unfortunately easy targets for pedophiles and sex abusers because they can take advantage of the trusting nature of the congregants. Instead of denying that a church has a responsibility in these situations, Hinton said, church leaders should be more forthcoming about the deficiencies that can lead to abuse. This, "How dare you accuse us of making mistakes?" response never ends well. Hinton said. Churches should admit their areas of weakness. One thing that I tell people is if you hear murmurings going on that this or that person is a potential threat, it's the church leader's job not to brush that off. It's their job to actually investigate. By investigate, I don't mean an internal investigation. I mean to contact police and open up an investigation. A lot of them say, well, that's not our job. Actually, it is. Not necessarily your legal responsibility, but it's your moral and ethical responsibility. Some states, still church leaders are not mandated reporters. There are some states that are still in the Stone Ages, but this case at that church, what happened and what was not reported was Kessler Lichtenegger was 17 years old at the time that he raped this girl in his van in the church parking lot during church VBS. The church knew that Kessler had some kind of a history, though his records were sealed because he was juvenile. They had been tipped off that Kessler had some sort of inappropriate behavior with his siblings. So the church leaders didn't tell the rest of the church because they thought putting a couple procedures in place of accountability would keep this guy in check. So they had him in like some sex addiction class. And they put an accountability partner. I talked about that yesterday, how it doesn't work. In this case, the accountability partner was his own father. He was a volunteer at a VBS. The dad of both of these daughters found out whenever he was looking at his daughter's phone. We talked a lot about technology yesterday. His 11-year-old had a phone, and he started finding explicit images that Kessler Lichtenegger was sending his 11-year-old daughter. He confronted Kessler Lichtenegger on church property and said, I know what you did with my daughter. He began to apologize for raping his daughter in the van, and he said, that wasn't the daughter I was talking about. That's how he found out that both of his daughters had been abused by the same perpetrator.
So was it a separate, I'm a little confused. It was a separate family, or it was his own family?
It was his own family, both daughters.
No, she's
Same-
saying there's
same
two
fear.
families involved. First, he was
Oh, yeah,
inappropriate with his
yeah.
siblings.
So-
Second, he was inappropriate with...
Actually, there were
Members
more.
of the
There were
church.
many more families.
Yeah.
So there was another family that was in 2014. That incident at the church was 2014. I think it was 2 years before 2012, or maybe 11 or something like that. Lichtenegger had taken a mentally handicapped, mentally disabled classmate of his, and she just didn't show up one day. I know this story because I've spoken with all the parents. They contacted me. That first incident, Kessler Lichtenegger, after school hours, walked this girl out, opened up a storm drain, pulled this girl down inside, beat the living crap out of her, and brutally raped her and left her for dead. I mean, literally. He's a violent, violent predator. That dad sued the school multiple times and tried to get Lichtenegger out of the school district. They tried taking the daughter who had been raped and said, you need to take her to a different school. Oh yeah. Oh, it got worse. There were a lot of details I probably can't say, but they have given me permission to tell this story, and they said, we want you to tell this story. We want this to be a national story. We want people to know about this case and how the church mishandled it, how the school mishandled it. So that's what the record was for. That was sealed because he was juvenile.
But he's 17, so he's still...
He was 17, still juvenile, but the
So
church that he started going to,
So he's 15 when he...
yeah, 14 or
The
15. I
handicap.
think it was 15 the first, yeah, with the first
The
rape that he got the
disabled
charge on.
And then you're talking 2 years later...
2 years
basically.
later, at the church knew that he had some kind of a record, and they knew it was something sexual. So they put him in a sex addiction class, and they allowed him to lead a group at their vacation Bible school. This is a church of 5,000.
Oh, wow.
Whoa.
Yeah.
They have
So-
more people that could have been that.
So the dad, well, the mom and the dad of the two girls at the church contacted me and said, would you be willing to come in? We want you to come in and do a training for this whole church, for all the staff, for all the volunteers. We want that legally binding, that it is mandated that they train everybody in the church. We want you to be the one to train them. I said, I'll do it. So they pushed and pushed, the parents pushed and pushed and pushed, said, we don't want to make this public. We don't want to sue the church. We want no money out of this. We just want the church trained so what happened to our daughters will never happen to any other person, human being, at this church again. Will you retrain staff? The church's attorneys came back and pushed back and basically said, I mean, I've read, I've seen documentation, I know it's true. The church attorneys wrote the family of the victims and said, go pound dirt, in a nutshell. And so the parents kept pushing and pushing and pushing. They said, we don't want to take legal action against the church. We just want you guys to admit that you messed up and to take actions to make sure this never happens again. They wrote back, go to hell, kind of thing, you know? Like, it was really rude, really put offish. This guy, you know, this attorney in this, when he gave a statement, we had published a news article. This was his counter. The church's attorney contacted the media and said, it's replete with inaccuracies. And so that's why he was given his statement. So they called us and he said, the reporter said, do you want to give a counter to his counter? I was like, yep, I do. So it was just like this volleying back and forth. So finally, and I was in communication with the parents, and they said, we think that we want to sue the church. And I said, do it, and do it big. I would do it, absolutely. After reading those emails and seeing the way they treated you, you know, something's got to change that culture. So they ended up, it was a big lawsuit, and they ended up settling out of court, and there were, you know, the non-disclosure, all the non-disclosure stuff, so the parents couldn't talk about it, and it's a big disaster. So here's another church, and there are tons of these churches out there where the public they'll never see this stuff. And so here's a church, they never retrained, you know, and they're
Going back to
right back at it.
business as
Yeah.
usual.
Absolutely. So, you know, all that to say, as we talk about the walkthrough and as we talk about thinking safety, you know, I didn't mention that, but the parking lot is a huge thing. With all these school teachers that are coming out, all these stories of school teachers over and over and over and over and over again, I'm finding these patterns within these school teachers that are having sex with their students, that over half of the cases that I've looked at, they're having sex and oral sex and all kinds of things in their cars out in the parking lot during school hours. And so churches, you know, as we think safety too, we're not just thinking gun safety and, you know, those things. We ought to just scan and, you know, across cars, and you don't have to peek in every car, but just scan in the cars and see, is there anybody sitting in their car? And if so, I'm just going to wander over and just think, and it could be somebody's just sitting in their car, and that's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you see somebody in the car and there's a minor, and all of a sudden they're jumpy, and they look suspicious, and the minor looks uncomfortable, that's when you beat on the window with a billy club, you know, and you take care of it. And you find out, and you call the police, and you say, now we've met the threshold of reasonable suspicion. You know, we were walking through the parking lot, we were doing our walkthrough, and you know, there was there was this activity in the car, and it looked very suspicious. There was a preacher, I don't know if you remember this one, down in Alabama a few years ago, and it was a minister, and on his way home after church on a Wednesday night, he got caught by a police officer who was just patrolling the area, and he saw a car sitting in an empty parking lot, looked suspicious, and he pulled up to the car, and it was the minister with a 15-year-old girl, and he was sodomizing her in the car. And he's now in jail, prison, with Alabama's laws, very tight laws on child abuse. You remember that one?
No, I don't.
Yeah, that was, we have a lot of mutual friends who just loved and adored this guy. Like, he was a highly respected minister.
I probably know if you said his name, but...
Yeah, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. It'll come to me
All right.
tomorrow when I'm on the airplane. Be like, I know it. So here's some things. I was taking some notes, and I'm just going to go through some things. And I want this to be a dialogue. So you guys absolutely feel free to interact. These are just some of the things that I saw. I'm going to write up a full report. So I write up a report. I'm not going to remember everything in that report, so it's not going to be like Jimmy flipped over every rock and every little thing that he saw he wrote up in the report. I just don't have that good of a memory. But I highlighted some of the major things that I saw. And you guys were with me, so you guys saw them too. No surprises. Library. Well, first of all, the kids, there were kids in and out of the auditorium. I'm not saying, I'm not really recommending that you tell kids, no kids can walk through the church building. If you're here, you're strapped to your parent's side, and you know, I think it's okay for kids to have a little bit of freedom. It's a church, not a prison. But that needs to be really closely monitored, because it literally takes a second. And I kind of demonstrated a little bit how over in the hub. Over in the hub building, you know, as soon as the teachers had turned their back, there were two little girls that were right beside me, and I said, you know, what an abuser would do, and it takes a split second. And these are not grabbers. These are not guys that are like, the car's out in the parking lot running and they're ready to grab a kid and run. These are your church members. These are guys who, they'll come in and they'll find, you know, they might find an excuse. Now that area is a lot more restricted, but in this building, what somebody could do is they could say, hey, Susie, you know, little girl comes out in the hallway, and they say, hey, Susie, your mom said that she needs to talk to you. Can you come with me for a second? You make up any excuse to get that kid to go with you. Or, hey, there's this really cool area that I want to show you. Or, like, your daughter had a punching balloon. I could take that balloon, like, this is just how they think, and it's that quick. I would think, I'd walk up to her and say, hey, that's a cool punching balloon. Can I show you some cool tricks? Yeah, and kids will comply. Kids will comply. So then I'd take her, you know, take her punching balloon and walk her around the corner. And we think that these things happen in all these empty corridors and empty spaces. It happens in broad daylight. It doesn't matter. You could have 200 people packed into your lobby, and I could break a kid away from there, and not one person would notice. And that's, you know, that Paula Robbins video is one of the most powerful videos, because pedophiles, grooming pedophiles, use those same techniques of just distraction and conversation and patter, and you know, they're talking to people and, hey, did you check your wallet? Do you have a MasterCard in your wallet? Like Paula Robbins demonstrates and shows that when your attention is diverted even for a second, and I hate to admit this, but all of you parents can relate to this. Let me change that. All of you fathers can relate to this. Because mothers are a little bit better, a lot better. But I've been holding our youngest in my arms talking to people after church, and just that conversation where you get distracted, my wife will come up and she'll say, "Where's Isaac?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And she said, "Well, he was just in your arms, wasn't he?" And I had this, oh crap moment, where I remember holding him, but I don't remember him leaving my arms, and I don't remember who took him or why they took him. And it's that powerful phenomenon that when, you know, as Paula Robbins says, when your Frank turns around, when somebody's dialoguing with you, you can empty people's pockets, you can take their watches off, you can do all this stuff blatantly right in front of them. And they don't notice. Take the kids. Me! They took my kid out of my arms. Me, out of all people, should have this super heightened awareness, and people still do it. It just shows, like, our attention is a very hackable, fallible thing, and we're not as attentive as we think we are. So that's why, you know, as I talk about this walkthrough, we need trained people who that's their job, period. Hall monitors who their job is not to greet people. Their job is not to say hello to people. Their job is not to stop and chat with people and hang out with people. Their job is security. And they have a very specific focus. And that's their job. And they're watching kids, and they're trained to know when a kid walks out in the hallway, I'm going to watch. And Andrew, you know, you're standing there watching me watch kids, and it's just this constant, you're hyper-focused, and you're just watching and seeing, okay, this kid came out here. Where did this kid go? Did the kid disappear around the corner? If the kid disappears around the corner, I need to check. Did the kid come back? Was the kid with somebody? Where was somebody's hand placement on the kid? Was there an adult coming up? Is there a hand on, you know, in a wrong place? You're constantly monitoring this stuff. And these sweeps through the buildings have to be frequent, routine, and there can't be areas like, you know, the famous stairwell upstairs. You can't have these areas that are unmonitored for 10, 15 minutes at a time. You just can't have it. So, you know, the solution is either cameras where that's being monitored all the time, or station people where they're either doing sweeps or they're just stationary at different posts throughout the different wings in the building. And one you have a money issue, you know, it's really expensive to put a bunch of cameras in, and the other you have a volunteer issue. It's hard to get that many volunteers and to train them properly. But those are the things that you guys will have to figure out, and I can give a couple suggestions kind of going down both of those routes. So the library was open. That surprised Andrew that it was unlocked. There were a lot of rooms that were supposed to be locked that weren't. The nursery off the auditorium, there was, if I remember, no lock on the door.
The nursing mom room.
Yeah, the nursing mom room. So that was in an area that was secluded, where if anybody wants to walk in, they can just walk in. They can shut the door. It has all the barriers, the privacy barriers. Anybody could have taken any kid in there that walks out of the auditorium into the hall, and in a matter of less than 2 seconds, you could have them around that corner, open up the door, go in, and you could molest them. So my recommendation for that was making that a lockable door and communicating with your congregation that any nursing mothers who need to go into that room, you don't have to hunt people down, and you know, when they need to go, that room should be accessible. So you create a process where somebody's in the hallway who has a key to that room. So when a nursing mother comes out, that person's easily identifiable. They know that that person has a key, and they know that's the person they need to talk to open up that room. They need access to that room, but everybody doesn't need access to that room. I have the prayer room, kind of that hallway where there's the prayer room and then the communion room across from it. Those were open. Those need to stay open. You don't want people who are in crisis and people who need to pray to hunt somebody down to unlock it and open it. But don't assume that because it's a prayer room, it's a safe room. So somebody can go under there or into that room. You could have different scenarios. You could have two teenagers who go into the room to pray together. Only they're not praying. They're praying, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Like, teenagers are, it's crazy how many churches contact me and say, we've had multiple issues with teenagers going into rooms during worship service and having sex on the couch or having sex in these areas. It happens often. So, prayer room, don't assume that just because it's a prayer room and that's a sacred space, and it should be a sacred space, don't assume that everybody's using that as a sacred space. So, hall monitors, again, they're going to peek in while giving people privacy. You don't need to open it up and be like, are you really praying? You know, you don't interrogate people. But you do look and you make sure, do people jump? You know, it's another one of those things. Are they surprised that you're there, or are they uncomfortable? If there's an adult and a kid in there, make sure that hands are properly placed and that there's not caressing and that there's nothing improper that's going on. And even, I would say if a minor is in the room with the adult, you do open up the door and just ask, if they're not in the middle of actually praying, just ask, is everything okay? Don't assume that just because a kid and adult's in there, that the kid is okay. Because the kid might be in distress. And you just want to make sure. Look at the kid, actually make eye contact and say, is everything okay in here? Okay, yep, okay, good, cool.
And come back 30 seconds later.
Yeah.
Would there be situations where that minor might just answer appropriately and say nothing's happening when something
Yeah,
actually
they're not
is?
gonna say okay.
Are they being controlled? I don't know.
You have to
I don't know.
you have
That's-
to observe the child's mannerisms, I would think.
Yeah.
It's, they could say okay, but they could be.
Right, if a kid's gotten uncomfortable, could they say that they're okay when they're not? Yeah, I think it's absolutely possible. But a kid, especially if a kid's been put in a really, just came out of a really uncomfortable situation, you'll be able to sense that something's not right.
Intuition.
Yeah, I would listen to intuition, absolutely.
And maybe go back, like you said, maybe go back later and say, is everything okay?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And then when they're away from that other adult, they could say, well,
Yeah,
they may open up, but then the intuition may kick in again.
yeah,
But
yeah.
shouldn't there be a kind of policy in place that children aren't alone with an adult?
I'd say unless it's a family member.
Yeah.
Somebody who they came there with, because
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
That's
yeah. You shouldn't have it. I would write that into policy if it's not already.
Well, that doesn't make sense either, because it could be their father or their uncle. Or
No, that's
their
what he's
grandfather.
saying, his father.
Yeah, if it's a
uncle,
family
grandfather,
member, if it's somebody
member.
who they came to church with, yeah, there's absolutely no problem with that.
They could be the abuser as well.
That's what I'm
Oh,
saying.
yeah, I
It
see.
could
Oh, yeah,
be.
yeah. Oh, it could be, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
They
you
shouldn't
can't
be in a
say
room
that.
together in a prayer room.
Together, alone, any adult, no matter who it is. Yeah, you could write that into policy. You have, by the way, statistically, you have 60% of pedophiles are incest abusers. 60%. So, yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, don't assume that because they're a family member that they're not abusing the kid. Yeah, I don't know. That's something that you guys are going to have to.
I think one of the other, if that goes into, and it should go into place, that it is announced that these are the new policies, these are the reason for the policies.
Yes.
So everybody is on notice.
Informed. Absolutely.
Informed
Absolutely.
that if you want to be alone with your child, for whatever, some of you might be disciplining them or whatever, if they're having an issue,
Yeah.
but it's in view of everybody, you know, you
Yeah.
can pull your child aside and pray anywhere, it doesn't have to necessarily be in that room.
I'm just thinking of that
But people
balance.
need to know that other people will be watching.
Yeah.
I've been part of the children's ministry for a number of years now, and I've heard multiple times just today that we already have that policy in place, so that's something that's already been written. I've never heard of any of these policies. I don't know the policies that we're discussing. I'm not aware of them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah.
I was just going to address that in a way. What we're also talking about revamping how we do leadership structure. And so in your team, every team that we have doing any significant ministry, if we address this well, every team will have a trainer or a teacher of some sort that's on the team to train every new person that comes in and say, here's the policies for this group. Here's the way this group operates. Here's how these things function. Now, the other would be, a lot of this stuff can be addressed because, you know, if you want to tell the church, well, if you tell them one Sunday, the church is different the next Sunday. You got different people that weren't there. So one way to address this is, over the course of time, we review it again and again and again. Another way to address it is, in new member classes, anybody that comes to our church and says, hey, I want to be here, I'm going to be here, I'm a new regular, there's a whole new process we have about all of that. But a part of it would be that there's a new members class that everybody goes through. And we have them sign off. If you're a real member here, you know our policies. These are our policies. We want to make sure you're aware of them. And so you can easily incorporate those kinds of things that they need to know. And do it in such a way that it will be addressed. And then you could spend a day in everybody's class and this or that, whatever, you know, bits and pieces of all that stuff can be addressed over time. But just to throw that out there so that we're not going at it again and again, I think we can set up a way to make sure that the bulk, like 90% of everybody, and especially any volunteer, knows the policy. The volunteers will know the policy. So otherwise they can't be on the team.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree
Yeah.
with that. And the other
Yeah.
question, the other statement, I have a daughter. There are times where my daughter does things that are wrong. She gets time out. That's one of her punishments. If I need to be alone with my daughter, and I have more opportunity to be alone with my daughter at home if I'm gonna do something
Yeah.
than doing it here.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know the elders, most of our elders have daughters, so they know that as well. If I were to abuse my daughter, I wouldn't do it here, I'd do it at
Right.
home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Well-
so if I think the policy that no adult should be alone with a minor is good. But with the caveat, if it's not your own, because, I mean, like I said, if I were going to abuse my daughter, I'd do it at home.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Well,
I
and for a
think,
rational person it would, but.
I mean,
I think you run into some, I mean, obviously everything you implement, there are going to be problems. There are pros and cons to everything. And so you have to, it's a balancing act, and you have to find out, you know, I always say there's this frustrating balance between doing what's legal, and that varies from state to state radically. The legal definitions of abuse change. The legal mandates for reporting change from state to state. The age of consent changes from state to state. The terms of probation and parole change from state to state. You have all these different things, so you have to be within your legal code for your state and for your county. So you have to do what's legal. You have to do what's moral, what's morally right. So what West Side Family Church did was not moral, was legal, wasn't moral, certainly wasn't the next one, ethical. You have to do what's moral, you have to do what's ethical. And there's another component. You have to do what makes sense. And then the fourth component, or fifth component, you have to do what actually works. You could be within the legal confines, you could do what's moral, you could do what's ethical, you could do what makes common sense, but it just doesn't work. And that changes from, what you guys do here would not work for my church. It just wouldn't work. We're 5,000 square feet, we're a tiny little box. What you guys are doing, what works for you guys is specific to this congregation, to your leadership structure. We have a completely different leadership structure. And it's finding that balance is really challenging. So there's not, people are like, well, don't you have a template of a policy? I do, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. Like, it can be a foundation, but you guys are going to have to wrestle through some of these things, and you're not going to get answers overnight. But, you know, the no adult being alone with a kid, you know, some of the deficiencies of that are, what do you do with single moms who come in? You know, you've got a single mom or a single dad, or you have families where, you know, ministers' wives are single mothers on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
There are a lot of times where my wife has to be alone with our kids, and you know, and so you get into complications there. So it's just finding that balance of, you know, what's right and what's right for different spaces within the church building. So, and I'm not, again, I don't claim to have all the answers, but these are things that you guys need to think through. And I would suggest having a team, a committee of people who comes together, who reviews your current policy as it is, and then takes the stuff from the walkthrough that many of you guys were on, and say, okay, how do we as a committee come together and take this policy and strengthen that and make this a stronger policy that works, that falls within all of the laws within, the current laws within the state of California, fire codes, all that stuff. Like, we talked about that stuff as we were walking through. You know, you've got all kinds of dynamics, and your policy as it is, it's not gonna work. I mean, it's a good start, it's a great start. But you're gonna have to come back and have a committee that really pours over that, and there's gonna be give and take. There are going to be disagreements on certain things. That's all good dialogue. That's a very healthy process.
But we also have to include whatever the insurance policies require.
That's exactly right.
To cover the incident. And my guess is that instance you talked about, the church, that the insurance people are doing all the talking.
Yes. Yes.
That's
yes.
where that.
Yes.
So that's where
yes.
ethics and morals runs into the law.
That's right.
You know, when you have an insurance, it's
That's
insuring
right.
you for an alleged incident.
That's right. And insurance companies are funny too, because they go by, it's a really bizarre thing, but they go by certain risk assessments, which are insurance standards that are just based on very antiquated research and based on limiting liability. At the end of the day, that's an insurance policy, and they'll tell you that. Our goal is to limit liability so that we don't have to dish out money. And
Lots of money.
at the end of the day, they really don't care about your kids. And they'll tell you that. It's not their job to care about your kids. That's our job. Law enforcement, they may care about your kids, but at the end of the day, law enforcement's job is to enforce law. People tell me all the time, I wish we would get stronger laws. You can't make abuse any more illegal than what it is.
Yeah, right.
The law doesn't protect our kids. Not on the preventative side, the law protects our kids because it locks up people and it executes justice in the right places.
After the bad's been done.
Yeah. So, you know, coming on the preventative side, on the front end of that, and saying, okay, it's not just about having a policy and actually following through with that, but it's about creating this culture where we're all communicating with each other and we all know. And there's this charisma and this just this rhythm that happens with all of us where we know. I love that you guys numbered your doors. Some of you might not even know that. All of your outer doors are numbered around this property, on the inside of the door and the outside of the door, so that if there's an incident, instantly the guys with the two-way radios, they know, door number 17, we have an issue. And they're not trying to figure out, a building this size, you don't want to spend 7 minutes with a map trying to figure out, which door are they at? So they're numbered. There's a lot of really cool stuff that you guys have implemented in recent months that keep doing that. Just keep thinking that way.
We only did that Thursday, so don't feel bad if we didn't raise it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah,
We'll get to it.
yeah.
Shh, you didn't tell them that.
So the prayer room, communion room, those are ones just a heightened awareness. Those are a little bit higher risk just because of where they're at. The Fing stairwell upstairs. Does everybody know there's a weird stairwell upstairs? Okay. So that's one.
The back one down?
Yeah,
Or the one going
yeah.
to the room?
The one across from the room that goes up to the roof. That goes down and outside.
Back down in the gymnasium.
Yeah. So that's just a really awkward place because it's hidden. It'd be real easy, again, teenagers upstairs, they could walk down into that stairwell. And my guess is probably you haven't had people monitoring that stairwell, and that's like the forgotten corner. People know that.
I'll take the door off tomorrow.
So, yeah.
No, because there's, what you need to prevent anything going is a door that goes before you go down the stairs. Because once you, no?
Putting a door there, I don't think will solve the problem because it has to be unlocked and you have to be able to push it open because
Right,
it's
yeah,
fire.
fire
It's a
code.
fire.
has to-
So
yeah.
the bigger issue is just monitoring it, policing it, patrolling
I'd
it,
say that's a
being
good
aware
place
of
for a
it.
camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had talked about a camera pointing both down the stairwell and back down the hallway. That way you have both,
Those
both angles covered. Those are simple fixes. I mean, you're not going to fix the awkwardness of that stairwell, but what you can do is monitor that routinely, regularly, constantly. Whether it's video camera, whether it's volunteers, you still do that. The couch upstairs at the top of the steps and to the left, that's an area too that it's awkward because it's around the corner, so it's hidden enough that we assume that people always go into these private rooms, close the doors, turn off the lights. Sometimes, yeah, but oftentimes it's right out in public, especially with pedophiles. Teens are a little bit more discreet. They'll be more private, usually. But pedophiles oftentimes exploit and abuse kids right in front of us, right in broad daylight.
I can't remember if it was you I was having the conversation with, but there's been people at funerals who, right in the middle of everything, because nobody wants to say anything, because, it was an accidental brush. This guy accidentally brushed every woman there and touched their breasts or the bottom.
Yeah.
And you're going, that's not accidental.
Yeah.
Well, it was a funeral, I don't want to say anything. And so, I mean, you could literally, if you feel somebody touching parts that shouldn't be touched, you should be, hey, and you should make a scene. It doesn't matter where it is or when it is. And then we should report that. We should be aware of it. And, I mean, granted, sometimes, you go to give somebody a hug and, whoa, that was, it's obvious that this isn't a repeated thing. This is a, whoa, I don't know what happened. Yeah. But there's some people who repetitively, they're the awkward person that always gives you that hug that accidentally touches something.
Yeah.
And so you have to say, hey, whoa, let's talk about that.
Yeah. While we're on that subject, we walked into, I don't know what you call it, but the little kid, no, the one in this building. The
nursery.
The nursery. So there was, the very first thing I noticed was that, there was one of the volunteers with a kid in his lap. and could have been a parent, I don't know. I'm a visitor here. But for me, that, you know, that's one of those things where, whether it's a female volunteer or a male volunteer, unless it's your own children, again, that's still not kids in your lap. Like, my wife teaches preschool. They had an issue with the kids that kept wanting to crawl into the laps of the workers. They just kept crawling into laps, crawling into laps. And they have a policy there where kids can't sit in the laps of any of the workers. So, you know, those are things that need to be considered too. I don't recommend ever having kids sit in the laps of people in that kind of a setting.
Is that, I'm just curious, was that does she work for a preschool, private preschool, or?
It's a non-profit, so.
Yeah, which
Yeah. So it'd be they have multiple daycare centers, multiple preschools.
Well, I just noticed, because I've worked at 2 different churches here and in another one, and I've noticed more and more now. I just sub, and I've noticed, I mean, things have gotten rules have gotten a lot more tighter
Yeah.
than they ever were before.
Yeah.
But obviously, that's why I figured that out yesterday. But it is kind of hard, because, like, when you're a kid, it's hard to say no.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But it's, you know, one of these things too, like some of these kids are just starved for any kind of attention. It's okay to give kids attention. Your kids were coming up and were like hugging me today, and you know, so I talk about that. We have written into our policy, and this is just us, but we have written into our policy, no adult in our congregation, that's whether you're a leader, whether you're a volunteer, or whether you're just a lay member. No adult in our congregation can initiate physical contact with any minor. So what that means is, I had somebody before and they were like, well, what about, can I give a high five? Yes, you can give a high five. You can't pull kids in. You can't give hugs that are unsolicited. Well, what if a kid comes up and hugs me? Yes, absolutely. That's encouraged. That's fine. Within reason. You know, if a kid comes up and hugs you, you can't take that kid and put that kid in your lap, you know? Or if the kid comes up and hugs you, you can't hug the kid and then start stroking that kid's back or rubbing the kid's shoulders. I've seen so many adults do this, and it's just where they walk up behind kids and they'll start rubbing their shoulders. And I'm like, no, that's not okay. That's not okay. And that needs to be written into policy with a very clear procedure where whether it's a strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, where the first time they're just informed and you say, look, you know, we need to review the policy with you, and here's where it says no adult can initiate physical contact with the kid. And then the next line, no adult may place a child in their lap. Where that's in the policy you pointed out, and they know.
What about your church nurse? Because I work in the nursery, I'm in charge of the 2-year-olds and below, and like it has been the nursery's policy in the past has been that the parents leave the children, and that way they get used to being there without the parent. And but then the child gets upset, and so we go to pick them up and hug them and console them, and you know, make them feel better.
Sure.
So, or if we're sitting in the rocking chairs and the child comes up to us and says that they want to sit on your lap, and so we put them on our lap. I mean, I had to think about it today, just from yesterday, because I had one little girl she sat on my lap before, and she wanted to come talk to me, and she was talking to me, and then I don't know if she wanted to sit on my lap, but I didn't put her on my lap.
Right.
Unless she asked.
Yeah.
So, and should we review the policy of whether we let the parents stay in the nursery, or because if they get upset and need to be consoled, if we can't pick them up or initiate, is that?
I would probably review it. This is just my opinion, it doesn't mean it's right. I'll make that very clear, it doesn't mean it's the right answer. I would probably review that, at least for a time, because you do have some kids that have a complete mental breakdown when mom and dad separate. And, you know, just certain age groups, when kids are in the early stages of, like, later stages of being a 1-year-old, early stages of being a 2-year-old, typically they have extreme separation anxiety, where they have a complete meltdown.
Right.
That's something where you don't want to leave a screaming kid in the care of people that, where you're like, I can't touch the kid,
Exactly.
you know? At the same time, you don't want to create a policy where you have exceptions here and you have exceptions here, or where you have gray areas and people are like, can I touch the kid or can't I touch the kid? You don't want to create confusion. So it's got to be a very clear policy where it's black and white, and it just says, okay, we're going to do what's legal, what's moral, ethical, what works, what falls within the insurance standards, and what's common sense.
There was some new law passed in Tucson before we left about if you are not the caregiver for this child, you are not allowed to change their diaper. Like, it was that strong.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how daycares dealt with that. But I'm thinking about, you know, the nursery, we started, they become the legal caregiver because they're being paid to care for the child. But the church, the volunteers and such, they were saying, well, look, I'm not changing another kid's diaper then. I'm going to call their parents back out to take care of this.
Yeah.
And we do have a pager system where we can call the parents.
Yeah.
So that's
Oh,
not
good.
without realm to, if we went to only the parent or person that brought them can change the diaper.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we do have a pager system.
Yeah, I can just say, you know, what they do at the preschool where my wife works, when they have kids who just, and some kids, I mean, you're going to have kids that have, I don't know what they call them in California, but they're TSSs where we are. They're an assigned adult for for autistic kids, and you have other disabilities that like where they have behavioral problems.
Or they have
Right,
one-on-one.
so there's
They have a
one-on-one. You know, unfortunately at churches, we don't have them. And so those kids do wind up in our churches. And sometimes the too deep in the classroom just doesn't work, because you've got a low functioning autistic kid that's just, you know, some are violent. I was doing a walkthrough at a church before, and there was a low functioning autistic boy that he threw himself down on the floor and was self-injurious, so like banging his head into things. Well, they finally got him calmed down, got him into a classroom, and the mother granted permission. That's where the physical thing gets a little bit tricky, because the mother said the only way that you can calm him down is if you come up and bear hug him and just rock him. And I witnessed the mother give permission to one of the workers, and they did that. The kid went from banging his head into the wall to he was calm. They got him in the classroom, and I was doing the walkthrough with the pastor, and we're kind of walking around. The next thing we just heard the door boom, and this kid ran out. He was probably 5, 6 years old. Ran out. I mean, just flew past us, and he hit a door that goes outside into the parking lot, and he was almost gone. And the teacher's helper in that room, I mean, she was awesome. She was on him, and she grabbed him, picked him up. Well, then he had a meltdown, and she had to, you know, hug him and give him that stimulation to calm him back down, and she got him back in. Well, they were like, the pastor was really apologetic, and he's like, oh no, he's like, you're doing a walkthrough, and we're trying to be on good behavior. I was like, no, that was a really good thing, because that's real life.
Mm-hmm.
That's real life.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they handled it with excellence.
And see, with another thought on that note is that the parents know their child, and they talked with their church family, and given the church family and a particular person or 2 or 3 people permission to deal. And that, as a Christian, can also give that parent the time to sit and worship and know that their child's taken care of. So in a sense, it gives, you know, I've worked with special ed children, so what you're saying, I've dealt with, and so it gives them the sense of, I can worship, I know my child's safe, but it's also the parents who need to make sure the people that are doing it are proper, and the elders and the church leadership know this is in place.
Yeah.
And that families can come to a church and know that if they have a special needs child, that they can be helped and taken care of and taught just like anybody else.
You know, something for, and I just thought of this, but it's something for a church this size. What might make sense for you guys is to have people who've worked in special education, and I'm guessing a church this size, you're going to have some teachers who teach special ed in the school system, where you might want to group them together, and I think they'll be happy to do it. It's just my guess.
They'd be happy to train others.
Yeah. Or train others, and have a specialized team of people. Maybe you don't have any autistic or mental disability children who are here now, so you do. So instead of kind of scattering them all over the place, you actually have a program, and even if it's 3 kids in your whole church, you have a program that's specific for them, or a class that's specific for them, who they're specialized people who know what they're doing, and that gives parents not only confidence that they know what they're doing with their children, but they're properly trained, and it's written into our policy that here's how we're going to handle people with special disabilities. That's just, it's something that we, like, I don't think through that when I'm writing policy, but we should. I think you might want to have something in your policy where if kids crawl into our lap, if they come up and they're just that, some kids just love physical. My middle son, he's 4 years old. Our kids are a lot alike. My 4-year-old son loves to just come up and he says, "Dad, I just love giving hugs." And he'll just come up and he just wants to cuddle and he just wants to, wrap his arms around me. And he's like that with everybody. He's just an affectionate kid. You might want to have in your policy where if there are kids that are like that, keep crawling up, you have a system where you redirect them, where you don't have your volunteers with kids sitting in your lap. At the preschool where my wife works, that's what they do. They just redirect them. So if a kid keeps crawling in the lap, they'll redirect them. They'll set them down and then they'll give them something to do instead of just holding the kid in their lap. It's redirecting that, that affection and that attention. And it's not saying, we're not going to give you any affection and, we're not going to touch you. And it's just redirection. But you do it in a productive way where you're still giving them, you're still giving them love and affection, but you're redirecting that physical contact. Do you want to take a little break?
I think it'd probably be good.
Yeah, let's take a little break, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll finish up.
Yeah, come back at
the rest of
2.
the things here.